we can get on with the my presentation. If you just give me a tick. Okay, so all being well, you should be able to see the title slide, which says Sustainable Travel at the Scottish Episcopal Church. If Jack, could you give me a thumbs up if that's coming across? Thank you. That's good to know. Okay, so my name's Daniel Prince. I work in the Net Zero team, and I am the Clean Energy Advisor. But full disclosure, before I worked at the GSO, I worked at Sustrans on active travel. So sustainable travel is very much part of my kind of interest group. So let's get on with this. First of all, I wanted to sort of tell you what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about what exactly is sustainable travel, because there's a few misconceptions about that. A wee bit on travel and ministry, and then the interesting stuff about what funding is available. So let's go on to the next slide. Yeah. So first of all, what is sustainable travel? And it's important here to recognize, because I'm sure someone's thinking it, it's not about making everyone walk or cycle everywhere. It's about finding out what is the most sustainable way to travel for any given journey from A to B. And there's a hierarchy, which I'll show you on the next slide, on to help you make those choices. But it's about, say you want to go from where you live to somewhere 50 miles away, you might need to do it in the next couple of hours. So that would dictate what was available in terms of whether you used a car or a private car or public transport. You might have a journey where you've got to take a lot of stuff along with you, in which case you can't carry it all, so you need to put it in the boot of a car. Or it might be a journey where there's a direct train line. And all these kind of things affect your choices. It's not just about saying you've got to use a bicycle or anything like that. So I just wanted to get that one out of the way before we go any further. It's about the choices being relevant and practical. Here's the sustainable travel hierarchy. And the idea is to move up as high up that triangle as possible. So ideally, walking and wheeling is great in terms of sustainability. There's very few emissions, and it has very, very little impact. And then as you move, and that is great for local journeys, say trips to the shop, or distances of up to, say, a mile or 20 minutes. Next comes cycling. Again, that's great for longer local journeys, maybe up to about 5 miles. Public transport, so we're talking about coaches, buses, trains. Again, if you live in densely in urban areas, you generally have pretty good public transport, or if you're going city to city, it works really well. Then we move down the hierarchy to cars and electric cars, which would be preferred to petrol and diesel cars in terms of the environmental perspective. And I imagine there will be a bit of chat about some of the range anxiety kind of issues with electric cars, and we can talk about that later on. And then last but not least is air travel. And to highlight this point about the fact that it's context specific. Say you were to go to a conference and you had to be there in person in Rio, there's no way that you would consider walking or cycling there. it has to be flown, and unless you've got a sailboat and an awful lot of time and the skills to do that, of course. So the question then becomes, how can I fly there with the least numbers of takeoffs? Because the business of taking off and climbing to altitude is what uses more fuel than cruising at altitude. So, as I say, very context specific, and the idea is to move up that hierarchy as much as possible for any particular journey that you might make. And I should say that we're taking the assumption that you need to travel. So we're taking the ideas of having using IT as we're doing today out of this, because we've already decided we need to travel in the context of the work that this is covering. So I'd like to ask you to take a quick break and use the chat to put into the chat if you've got any ideas already that you're thinking about how sustainable travel could be encouraged in your church. And maybe if you've got any ideas, you could pop them in now. And it's just to kind of take the temperature of where you're at in terms of thinking about this. And I'll just give a couple of minutes to do that, if you please. I see. Electric car leasing for priests. Well, we will cover that as a possibility. Recharging points, definitely. Yeah. Those are all good ideas. Car sharing. Yeah, so I've done that before. It's great. It can work really well. Another one for car sharing. Okay, let's move on then. I don't wish to kind of secure bike racks, definitely, and green ticket schemes. A small bus to collect the congregation. That would be a great idea. Okay, right. So let's just move on from that to my next slide, because I want to talk very briefly about sustainable travel and mission. Now, I'm not a theologian, so I don't feel particularly qualified to go into this in detail, but there were one or two things that I thought were worth just saying. And these are some things that speak to some of these themes that are in the Net Zero Action Plan of discipleship, justice, and hope. So if we can take people out of cars and move them up that hierarchy to be, say, traveling in public transport or using a bicycle or walking around their community, it places them more visibly in their communities. And it also speaks to this visible demonstration of thriving to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew life on Earth. And of course, from a personal point of view, for the people that are traveling around like that, these more active modes are good for general health and mental well-being. So there's lots of benefits to it. And I wanted to, this is maybe a little bit left field, but I wanted to show you this. This is a diagram from a book by a guy called Donald Appleyard, he wrote the book Livable Streets in 1982. And what he was an urbanist who was based in the west coast of America, and he was looking at three very similar streets. The difference between the three streets was that one had heavy traffic on it, the one that you see on the left, the middle one, the one with the orange in it had moderate traffic, and the one on the right had light traffic. And what he did is he examined the levels of social interactions in these three situations. And you see that more people knew each other and had friends in the street where there was light traffic. And you see that by the lines, and the dots show where people gather. And so there are more people gathering on the street. So this is quite interesting in that it shows that if you can take traffic out, and then it's better for communities. And I think this speaks to our ideas of sustainable transport, in that it's not just good in terms of carbon emissions, but it also is good in terms of community, and therefore speaks to some of the things we want to do in terms of justice. So I just find that a really interesting slide, and it gives us another take on why we're doing this. Okay, so let's move on to the Sustainable Travel Grant. The details are going to be up on the Net Zero Church portal very shortly. I reckon it's going to be next week. I was just discussing internally getting some of the I's dotted and the T's crossed this morning. So that'll be ready very shortly. And there'll be guidance and an online application form. There's going to be up to £1,500 per grant, and there'll be a total of £30,000 per annum available. And it's going to be, we're trying to make it as simple as possible. On the online application, you'll explain how much you want, what you want the money for, and how it will encourage sustainable travel. And you'll also agree how we can get some feedback from the benefit of your grant. So we're interested in that because it helps understand what we're affecting and if we need to make any changes. The grant is available to churches, cathedrals, and dioceses, and it's going to be open throughout the year. So there's not going to be any like quarterly board meeting that assesses and deadlines that you have to meet, but it's just going to be available on a rolling basis. And it's going to be we won't be allowing retrospective funding. It must be appropriate to the location and circumstances of the charge. And as I say, we want people to report back on the impact. So some possible ideas, I've just put up a few pictures here. It could be a charge point or contribution towards an electric vehicle. It might be support for cycling, say cycle racks. These ones are not covered, but I do think that covered cycle racks are even better. Or it might be that you want to buy a bicycle for use by members of your church. Possibly you could think about a folding bicycle, which you could then take on public transport. And then when the public transport doesn't actually take you to where you want to go, you can do that last mile on a bicycle. You might have ideas around encouraging people to use public transport. If you've got say a food bank and you're delivering food in the local community, you might think a cargo bike would be useful. The thing that I'm saying here is that you can order off the menu, because we haven't got any prescribed list or menu for you to choose from. It's really just up to you to make a good case for what you want to do that is going to help move people up that hierarchy, and we'll consider funding your idea. So I hope it'll be very flexible and you'll have lots of great ideas that we haven't even thought of yet. So a bit about the application process. We wanted to make it as sort of smooth and straightforward as possible. there'll be an online form on the Net Zero portal within the funding section. And in it, as I say, you have to explain how much it will cost and why it will encourage sustainable travel. That online application will go to a member of the Net Zero team, and usually that'll be the person who is assigned to your diocese, but clearly if someone's away, we can cover for each other. That person or their whoever's covering for them will assess the application. They might get back to you and suggest some modifications. So there might be a little bit of toing and froing, and they'll also agree what feedback you're likely able to give them. Once that's all done and it's good to go, they give a formal assessment which goes to the Net Zero director, who is responsible for making the final decision and giving that approval. They then you will be informed of the decision, and will also tell the finance department in the General Synod office. After that, it's up to you to incur the expenditure as agreed, and then we will make payment once that expenditure is agreed on production of proof of expenditure. So that would be either a copy invoice, or it could be a receipt. There may be occasions when a church hasn't got the money to make the expenditure up front, and in those cases, we're happy to discuss providing the grant ahead of expenditure. But our preferred model is going to be that you spend the money and then we give it to you back. But as I say, if there are cash flow problems, then we're happy to have a discussion about that. Oh yes, and as I've mentioned, at a later date, we'd want feedback, and that would be agreed as part of the process. It's important to us because we want to know how well you've done and how it went, but also in terms of providing a case to continue this grant funding and to refine the process as we go along. So can I ask you again to use the chat? And if you've got thoughts now on how you might use that £1,500, it would be great if you can just bung them in the chat. And I appreciate that you've already put some stuff in that would cover this, but if you've got anything else now, let's just give it a couple of minutes and see what people come up with. I'm not seeing a great deal, so I'm assuming that you've probably already given me your ideas, which is absolutely fine. So let's move on then to my final slide, and then we can have discussion. So, as I say, the details will be up by the end of next week on the Net Zero portal, netzerochurch.scot/funding/, and there'll be detailed guidance and an application and the application form, which will be online. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and open the open everything up for discussion. Right, I think we should have stopped sharing now.
Yep, you have. Just to instigate a discussion, there was a comment that was made earlier on the need to include ferries in the hierarchy. As for a lot of the Argyll and Isles charges, it's essential. So do you have a perspective on where that would go? Is that in the public transport level, Daniel?
Yes. I mean, I think across the Highlands and Islands, if when you're traveling, you're going to, whether you go by public transport or use a car, or if you're walking, you'll get on a ferry. So I think that is, if you're going if you're going from an island to the mainland or island to island. So I think we take that as a given that ferry use is um, is inevitable, and it's not something that really is too much to. I'm trying to think what the right words are. It's going to happen, and it's part of our transport experience, and we'll need to use them. I
Right.
don't know if that answers the question.
It wasn't so much a question, I guess. It was just
Sorry, I was the one who raised that question, Donald Bruce. We live in Skye, and several of the charges in the Argyll and the Isles, basically, you actually have to get a ferry to get to church. So I mean, it's as basic as that in some cases. Likewise, Orkney. So it's I think it's something which is an essential, but where does it fit? What's the level of within the public transport? Is this a pretty bad one or a pretty good one? I
Oh,
really
I
don't know.
see. Well, if you're going on a ferry, you're either going to be walking on, you're going to be taking a bicycle on, or you're going to be um, driving on. So it's going to be one of those three things. And I think I think the ferry is something that you have to use, and it's sort of almost like hard baked into your travel as someone who's moving about the islands. So it is there. I mean, I could go and see what the carbon impact of ferries are, because that is definitely in there. It's in some of the government figures, but I think the key point is that there's no flexibility about using ferries, and therefore that it's not part of the choice. Yeah, does that answer your question, Donald? Yeah, good.
Rebecca, would you like to elaborate on what you put in the chat?
Yes, I'm afraid it might look really rather sort of despondent, because we're here down in rural Ayrshire. We have no trains that will get you to church on time between one town and another. Unless everybody's going to reschedule all the times of services, that's not going to work. We also have elderly people who are totally incapable of riding a bicycle in our highly hilly villages and main roads between villages. So the options that you're showing at the moment, which really I can understand in a more urban situation, work much, much better in terms of using bus, using trains, getting on a bike. I walk to church, and people who walk can walk to church, but that doesn't cost anything. That's something we do. But nobody cycles to our church, and we have electric bikes for hire in the town. Nobody hires them because it is actually, distances are too difficult, too far, and not easy for elderly people at all. And the majority of the congregations that we have in most of the diocesan churches is would struggle with the cycling more than half a mile, I would suggest. So it's really about how this could be expanded to encourage more efficient use of the vehicles that are having to be used. I think there needs to be something that's tolerated within what you're offering.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think you speak to quite a lot of different things there that and so interesting. I mean, I totally accept your point that it is much more challenging in a rural location than well, I'm in Edinburgh, and you've got trams, trains, buses, airport, everything. And I think that I mean, it's interesting because when we were talking about this initially, one of the things that Bishop Ian said is like, oh, you could spend money on, or you could consider changing some of your church services times to fit in with the public transport timetables. So I suspect once you change your services times, the public transports timetables might change as well. But I think this is why we're being very open and flexible about what we can provide, because it's going to be very much bespoke and dependent on your own circumstances. And the thing that I thought might work from what you've described is looking at some kind of car sharing scheme, or
we already have that. I'm going to say we already do that, and we pick up and collect elderly members of the congregation who live so far they can't walk to church, who would have walked to church but don't anymore. So that covers that, but there isn't a cost that really is attributed to that. The only other option, there is a community minibus that we could hire, but actually the cost of hiring that's quite high, and it requires that you have somebody who's allowed to drive the minibus, or you have to pay for somebody who's driving the minibus. Now, you might say, well, we could do that once a month or something like that, and perhaps put together a cost of what that might be, couldn't you?
Yeah, indeed, you could, and you could pilot that, and you could say, we want to look at that, and the only way to really understand how whether that's going to work or not is if we actually do it, and in which case I think if you put a proposal for a pilot to look at that in your community, then that would be something that we would be certainly willing to consider. I mean, and here we are. That's not something that I had thought of, so it wouldn't have gone up on our list of menus if we'd had a prescriptive list. And you've already come up with something that is very interesting, but it is and it sounds viable, but we hadn't thought of.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if the numbers are so small, you might not even go for a minibus. You might actually go to a local taxi firm that maybe has a people carrier that could pick up 6 people, for example.
Yeah, and that's about sharing vehicles and making sure that the utility of a vehicle is maximized.
Yeah. Okay, that's quite helpful.
Okay, good. Anybody got any other questions or points that you want to raise?
There's a question in the chat. What about money to train a small bus driver who might also help the local school bus run?
I think that is potentially doable if it's going to, if the effect of it is going to have one vehicle going around helping people get to church, for example, rather than several, then that is helping in terms of reducing emissions and improving sustainable travel. So that's a possibility in itself. I mean, some of these ideas I think we'd have to look at in a bit more detail, rather than saying yay or nay here and now. But they sound like possibilities for sure. Okay. I was wondering, and I'm a bit surprised that no one has raised range anxiety in electric cars, and I was wondering if you wanted to have a discussion about that or cover some of the points on that. Rebecca, you look like you're going to say something.
Yes, as an electric car owner for the last 5 years, range anxiety disappears after about 3 months, especially if you've got a vehicle that you know is reliable and it's telling you how many miles you've got, and you're basically going to your closest church. I can do about 250 miles in good weather, so I always just make sure that my car's charged before I'm doing a long journey, and I think every other electric vehicle driver does the same. I think range anxiety is a pretty short-lived experience.
You said just what I'd love to hear people say. Thank you. I was going to say a couple of other things about that. Firstly, I know that the charging network in a lot of the rural parts of Scotland is nowhere near as good as it should be. So I wanted to tell people that the Scottish Episcopal Church had contributed to the government's consultation on that, and that not necessarily because of what we said, but subsequent to that consultation, the Scottish Government are investing £5 million in upgrading and improving the charging network across rural Scotland. So that is happening. And the other thing that I wanted to tell people, because I also have an electric car, doesn't quite have the same range as what you have, Rebecca, but is that if you look on the second-hand market, certainly the cost of EVs is dropping and dropping, and the range that is available for second-hand cars at any price point is becoming better and better. So I think we can just keep holding tight, and in well, even now it is getting much better. Now there's a few questions that have come in here.
Sorry, hang on. Sorry, I had my hand up on the.
Yes,
on
yes,
the,
Donald, let's do you first.
I also have an electric car. We live in the Isle of Skye, and we travel quite often to Edinburgh. That was one of the reasons for buying it. And that journey between the Isle of Skye and Edinburgh is a very interesting one to plan. But I agree with Rebecca. You plan your journey around where it is you stop, and provided the charge machine is actually working and nobody's there, you're okay. If you decide to go across through Fort William to Dalwhinnie, there's only one charger at Roy Bridge, and whether it's working or not is a bit of a lottery, quite frankly. So it can be a problem, depending on your journey and how frequently. If you're local, completely different matter, provided you have your own means of doing it, your own charging facilities in your own house. If you don't, then you're very vulnerable. So I think I would sort of add a sort of bit of a rider to Rebecca, that it usually is okay, but you can run into problems.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I find that you always have to have a backup plan when you're doing a long journey. We've got a few
Yes.
points here.
There's a comment from Rosie that as the rector, there's still the issue for me that an electric car would be a lot more expensive for me to buy than my current Hyundai i10. I don't know if you want to respond to that, or if I should combine that with the next question.
Well, I'll respond to Rosie to your point first. I mean, I don't know how much money you have, but you can buy a really old Nissan Leaf for under £5,000, but it won't have much range. But my observation is that, like about a year ago, if you had, say, £20,000, you could get a second-hand vehicle which would have a range of over 300 miles. And now, a year later, with £15,000, you can get that. So things are getting much, much better, and they're getting better very quickly. And to Martin about what are the thoughts on plug-in hybrids for those who need more range? Well, certainly they can provide a lot more range. They don't have, they're better than a pure petrol or diesel engine, but they are not as carbon efficient by any means as as a pure electric vehicle. So if you really need a lot of range, then they are probably quite a nice option. But there again, I was looking at a YouTube video by a prominent Scottish climber who bought a Tesla, one of the Teslas, and I know that there are issues with Tesla in terms of Elon Musk, but he said he manages to drive all over the Highlands and it works for him. So I think that with a longer range, you probably leapfrog some of these issues about being able to charge, because every couple of 100 miles at least you'll need to stop anyway for a cup of coffee. Neil, I see you've got your hand up.
I have. So going back to the Scottish Government funding we were talking about earlier, I was with the Dean and Reverend Nick Barry in Eleithin just over a month ago. And the conversation was, we've got space beside the church, there's government funding, could we put a electric vehicle charging point in that space as a community asset, because that part of the borders, there's not a huge amount of options for charging your EV. So there's an opportunity perhaps for some of our more rural churches that have space to install a EV charging point with it being funded by the Scottish Government. So that would certainly help people who have range anxiety and encourage more people to use EV, particularly in rural areas. So it may be something that our charges may wish to consider if they have a suitable space within their wider church area.
Thank you.
Sorry, me again. Would it be possible for for a diocese to actually organise leased cars for their clergy? That's actually how we managed to afford to have our car, is that it is leased by through our company, and we pay. It's a 3-year contract. And the cost of that is very, very comparable with us when we were going to buy a car. And that would be something that perhaps each diocese could consider, whether it was feasible to allow their clergy to do that through the diocese effectively as their employer. I don't know if that would work.
I imagine it might well do. I mean, the key point there that you say is that it depends on the employer. Because we're in a similar position. My wife's employers, we lease our car, our EV through them, and we used to have a old Ford C-Max that was breaking down so much and so regularly that we did the maths and we reckoned it was cheaper to lease a new EV than keep repairing this old car, which was totally unreliable. So I think it can be economic, but that is something that it needs to be done through the employment, because it's all about basically paying for the lease before your tax and national insurance, much like the cycle to work scheme. I see, Rosie, you've said that would be something that would need to take to standing committee. Yeah, so we'll take a note of that, and I guess the way to do it is we can flag that to Patricia and Dee and see if they think that is something that would have legs. Donald, have you raised your hand again? Yes.
Yes, just to say, any idea what a fast charger would cost to install if you had 3-phase available to you?
I
Fast
believe
charger rather than a slow one.
Yeah, if it's a really fast charger, I think you might be talking £100,000, but and that would be for one for the really fast one. So they are not cheap. I do know that much, but I want to say this about chargers, and that is that if you've got a domestic charger or a domestic type charger, so you're talking up to about 7 kilowatt chargers, then one of the things that I have seen are various community models where you can share them, and that might be quite good because it allows other people within the community to use that charger. And there's a couple of different models. There's one we went on a holiday to Kielder over the summer, and the house or cottage that we rented had a charger with a QR code, and you could scan the QR code, and it took you up to a website where you were able to buy, say, 6 hours of charging, and you then plugged the car in, and you got 6 hours of charging, and that was really neat for us. But it would also work well, I think, where you just had people who wanted to charge their car, and maybe you had the charger in the church car park. And of course, the other thing that you can do with that is that you can use it to get a little bit of money for the church. Down here in Edinburgh, where I live, we've got St. Columba's Hospice, and they've got a decent sized car park, and they've put in about 10 chargers, and they're clearly doing that to support the hospice.
Great. Are there any more questions then, or ideas?
Sounds like everyone is content.
So Daniel, when will people be able to apply for this again?
Okay, so it is I need to get the information, which will be a PDF with the guidance and the online form onto the website. We're going to do that next week. So by the end of next week, so a week, it will be available. So if you think a week on Monday, which is what, the 10th or the 11th of November, it should be available.
Great. Well, I'm sure that we will send out information about that or put it up on our website once it's available. So keep checking that in order to get the most up-to-date information. Great. Well, then if there are no more comments or questions or ideas, we can wrap it up here and give everyone back a few minutes. Thank you everyone very much for attending. Thank you, Daniel, for that presentation. And I hope that some interesting novel projects will come from this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It was good to talk to you, and I hope you apply soon. We're looking forward to spending money on you, or for dishing out money to you.